oh, just let me oh.
That clock keeps ticking like a metronome, and my thoughts keep telling me to get me home, but my balls keep telling me to let me oh, just let me oh.
The Seamaster Professional, a watch that rejuvenated the classic name for the modern era. I'll be discussing the impact that this watch had when it was first introduced, while also running through the watch's design language that is quintessentially its own. Also, if you would like any of your thoughts or topics on watches discussed by a designer, comment them below and I'll write them up. I'll start by saying that we all know this watch. I, like some of you, grew up in a time when this watch was everywhere. We all know that Pierce Brosnan was responsible for selling these by the shipload during the 90s. But more than that, more than the hype and marketing surrounding this piece at the time, I think the Seamaster Professional was an absolute game changer. I will be covering 3 years that to me were the times when this watch took another step, which has culminated in the watch that we all know today. First, I'll ask the question about competition, because as I've mentioned before, competition causes desperation, and desperation causes innovation. So who has always been Omega's predominant competition? The answer, that probably won't come as a surprise, is Rolex. This competition has always been around between the two brands, and neither of them have been affected by it greatly, since their watches are quintessentially their own and have created an audience and devotees of both. But what is interesting is how the hierarchy of power was and still is shaken over time. Rivalry in this area is always fascinating. The Seamaster's origins go back further than we would guess. The original design debuted in 1932 and was based around a marine watch, or what was known at the time as a marine chronometer. It was picked up and widely favored by professionals because of its waterproofness at the time, being used by Navy and on expeditions under the sea in bath escapes. In 1948, the Seamaster name was given to the watch. So let's have a quick look at the original. Bear in mind that at this time, people had less idea than a goat about what would actually qualify as a sports watch. But we all know this dial layout today. This is an Omega. The dead giveaway are the indices that are sharp and pointed. Maybe it was their intention to have them look exactly like shark teeth. And then of course, the 12, 3, 6 and 9 numerals. This configuration is tidy and neat, and as a result, the dial is extremely legible at a glance. It says something different about itself. It is trying to be subtle, but at the same time isn't. Then moving to the case, we can see that the elegant approach of the dress watch has been lost in favor of a more robust steel platform with a much thicker lug and case design. Even the crown is thicker and prominent, with knurling that makes it easy to grip. This model is the dawn of an early genre of a sports watch, and Omega favors it so much that they have just re-released the watches in a 70th anniversary edition, and they have been received with great praise. You have to admit that it looks cool. One would even say timeless by today's standards. Then it was 1954, and a relatively young company brought out a game changer. We know it today as the Submariner. This model of watch was the first, for lack of a better word, mainstream dive watch that was quickly adopted for professionals. Now the race was on. The once coveted Seamaster had lost its standing. To counteract this in 1957, the next generation of Seamaster was released. Now we see a change, but at the same time, a watch that still screams Seamaster. The watch had adopted a radium dial, and the markers still represented the layout that had become a staple. But now it had distinctive arrow hands and a rotatable bezel. Nobody can deny that this was an excellent evolution of the watch. And again, the Seamaster had a good footing amongst professionals. The models continued to evolve alongside their Rolex counterpart. The models were incrementally improved, but something happened. Rolex had managed to secure its position. It had better marketing, better recognition, better advertising. The Submariner just remained, and the Seamaster, though still popular in the correct circles, being used for military applications along with other things, fell to the wayside for a time. Then something else happened. Rolex became lazy in the early 90s. The Submariner was a great watch at the time. It was worn everywhere by everyone, but there was an oversight. perhaps by the executives at Rolex or by pure accident, there was an opportunity for Omega to creep back into the fray. And after a few years of tweaking the design, this time they produced a watch that looked completely different to its predecessors, now branded as a professional. So the Seamaster Professional was born. Not only did it have quirks like a distinctive manual helium release valve and skeleton hands, but it came with a bracelet that became synonymous with the watch. More than that, some would say that it had superior build quality at the time. One only needed to compare the watch's clasp to its counterpart to see how a stamped piece of steel competed with a milled block of steel. But then this watch became an icon of its own without much need for marketing because it was attached to James Bond. From 1994 until 2004, this watch was on his wrist continuously. For 10 years, this watch was seen in 4 movies. I would say the only other counter to that would have been the Submariner used in the Connery era that saw 4 movies as well. But at that time, wristwatches weren't anywhere near as marketable. So the Seamaster gained serious publicity. So let's finally have a look at the model. First impressions tell you that it is a modern dive watch. It now has indices and no numerals attached to the dial. Its layout is clean, and what I like are the double stick markers at the 12 position. It makes the dial more congruent. The best decision made was making this watch blue instead of the ubiquitous black. It gave the watch a distinct look completely, and now the color was a signature of the piece. Another interesting, if not strange idea, was to incorporate a wave pattern into the dial. It does add interesting visual cues to the watch. It was not necessary, but even here there was a thought about how to liven up the watch. What I always find interesting about these watches is how the turned-in lugs looked so small relative to the watch head. They almost disappear, and I think it is a great aesthetic for a dive watch. The instrument itself is the dial and should be the focal point. The Bezel Knurling is also fascinating because it has been cut in such a way to make it functional but also subtle. And with all of these elements combined, I think it is clear that the design language for this watch was to make it suitable for active outdoor usage but also in formal business attire. They wanted to have this watch work in many scenarios, and I can honestly say that they have succeeded with this design. You don't need to look further than to the bracelet and see how it offers function along with form. Now we get to the gritty part, the criticism. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything in these discussions. Let me start by saying this watch never appealed to me when I was younger. I like how it was a gadget in every Bond film. I like the fact that it played such a prominent role in the films, but the Submariner always took center stage for me. More on that in a different video. Speaking as a designer who appreciates history and heritage behind the styling of products, I don't see the original Seamaster in this watch. If you had to ask me to choose between this and the 57, I wouldn't even think about the one to choose. Like I mentioned earlier, the loss of the distinctive numerals on the dial makes the watch look cleaner, but it also loses me a little. It just feels like a different watch, and maybe that is what they were going for with this watch when it was introduced. It was called the Seamaster Professional after all. The bracelet has received praise and criticism over the years, but I will say that it fits the watch for its purpose. It does also look dated today, and the bracelet would have probably lasted longer if it had a flat aesthetic instead of rounded links that were highly reflective. So revisiting this watch now in 2019, it looks dated. Its design does not hold up anywhere close to the Submariner, and honestly, that is not something I want to say, but I feel it is the truth, and I'm sorry to say it. If the brand had stayed true to the original design of the 40s and 50s, I believe that we would have seen a watch that may have surpassed the Submariner in the later years. The Seamaster Professional of the 90s was a product of its time, but it did something that changed the game. I have a theory that it is because of this watch that Rolex was forced to introduce a modern line of Submariners. For the first time since its reveal, the Submariner was on the back foot in the 90s, particularly in the realm of manufacturing. They needed to modify their pieces to fit the modern genre, and then we were introduced to the 6-digit references. Only last year did Omega bring out a revival again, and this watch is seen by many as something superior to the Submariner. And I would have to agree. I think this watch is a very strong statement, offering better performance, excellent build quality at a fraction of the price. Like I said in the beginning, rivalry is fascinating, and the battle between these two brands is a case study on how both images of the watches they have produced have become even better because of competition. Now, a designer needs to show their worth, so I made a mock-up of what I believe would have made the Seamaster even better if the brand had stuck to its guns and kept the original design language. Here I have taken the design of the new model, but placed a 57 dial inside it, removed the helium release valve and the watch's crown guards, and to me, I think this looks more like a modern classic and something that could have stood the test of time. But hey, it's all up to personal opinion. Regardless of my thoughts, the Seamaster Professional is an excellent watch, and nobody can take that away.